Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. We're continuing the conversation about autism awareness and acceptance in Trinidad and Tobago. Joining us on Now is Gabriella Sankar, a Developmental Disabilities Specialist, to share more about the topic. Good morning, Gabriella.
Good morning. Hello.
How are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. And thanks so much for being with us this morning as we continue this conversation about autism awareness. And one of the first things we need to talk about is what is autism and what does it look like for those who have not been exposed?
Yeah, definitely. So autism or autism spectrum disorder, it's a developmental sort of condition that affects a person's communication, their social interaction, and their behavior. So it is a spectrum disorder, which means that the symptoms and the characteristics of what the person may identify or look as can vary widely among autistic individuals. You know, one of my favorite quotes about autism is that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? No two autistic individuals are the same. But that being said, you know, there are some common signs and symptoms, such as difficulty with social interaction, such as making and maintaining eye contact, understanding social cues, and engaging in social conversation, play, that type of thing. You may notice repetitive behaviors or routines, such as like repeating words or phrases, or insisting on like sameness in their routine, their day-to-day lives as well. That is in addition to some restricted interests now, so such as like intense fixation or preoccupation with an item or a certain topic, or difficulty engaging in a bit more like imaginative concepts and imaginative play for younger ones. And then lastly, they may experience sensory sensitivities. So that might look like an aversion to a sound, a texture, a taste, and it could be a oversensitivity to something, or it might be an undersensitivity to something. So light, sound, and touch, right? So it's important to note that individuals with autism, you know, they may have all of these different characteristics, or they may have one or two, right? So it's to varying degrees as well. And so then they may also have strengths and abilities that are not always recognized, right? So that's one thing that I think is nice to highlight. And then, you know, it affects everyone, right? So it affects people of different backgrounds, different cultures, and that makes a difference in the long-term like outcomes for individuals for autism as well.
Now, something you just mentioned is that it affects everybody. What would you say in your experience has been some of the biggest challenges that individuals and families with autism face?
Yeah, so I think that in my experience, some of the biggest challenges, like kind of going back to, well, this is Autism Awareness Month, right? Yet one of the biggest challenges that I have definitely experienced with the families I work with is that lack of awareness, or that lack of understanding. You know, there may be limited understanding for some, and just some just totally not knowing what autism is. And hey, we have to think about that too, because I think, I mean, from what I remember when I was in school, I didn't learn about autism until I chose to study autism, right? It's not something that our kids and our families are necessarily being taught on a regular basis, if ever. And so that lack of awareness and education does then impact families who then may have an autistic child, because the parent themselves, they don't know how to support their kids. And then when it comes to family members and maybe society members, community members, they may also not know, you know, how do I interact with this individual? Do I interact with them in the same way that I would anybody else? The answer would be yes. But that, I think, that in addition to what the lack of education does is create like a stigma sometimes. And so that then is at the disadvantage of the child and the family, because the families then feel like, oh, we do not want to leave our home, we don't want to take our kids out, And it's a very sad situation. So that's just one of the challenges that I have experienced. In addition to that, there may be limited access to services, right? Because services such as like diagnosis, therapy, specialized education, unfortunately, the field it is growing, right? The services are growing, but still, in my day to day life and work, I see that I have families that, hey, I would love to be able to refer you to somebody, but the waiting lists are out of the door, and so the access to services on one end, it's just we don't have the manpower to be able to support these families. And then when it comes to the financial barriers, because these services are not cheap, right? So services and support for autistic individuals can be very expensive, right? They may need speech therapy, they may need occupational therapy. The initial evaluation itself, it's really really costly for families, and so that can be a barrier. If you have a family who cannot afford that, then they can't get the support that their child may need. And then when we think about our kids, our autistic children, when they get older, and that's where I think it becomes even more challenging, because we can see that there are providers for like the younger kiddos, and we can see that there are maybe schools that would be inclusive for some. But I think then later down the line, when the child gets older and then continues to need supports, I find that that's another area that's really challenging. So there's that. Um, some schools in Trinidad and Tobago may have like the necessary resources to support autistic children and students. But that's another area that I think there's a big challenge, because for the kiddos who can, or the older students, right, who can access school with their level of skills and independence, etc., for those children, it's hard for me to even say, well, yes, this is a great opportunity. This school, you can go to this one, and they will say yes, take you in, and they would support you through your time there, right? Of course, there are some, but I think that for many families that I've worked with, they've experienced the school just straight out saying, no, sorry, we won't take your child, and that's really not how it should be. So I know I've kind of gone on. There's a lot of challenges. And I think that would be like the main focus and the main areas that we still need a lot of support for.
Gabriella, thank you so much for mentioning that. Now, you mentioned two key things and then went on to expound and, of course, talking about education, which is so important. And ideally, the younger we learn, the more we're going to be inclusive, which is something that we all need to continue to work towards. Because, again, it wasn't part of our, let's say, socialization growing up unless we were immediately exposed to somebody who was living with autism. So as you've mentioned, some of the schools that do have some sort of programs and then the majority that do not, what can we do right now as individuals to learn more about autism, and how can we practice inclusion?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So, I mean, I think that, of course, we live in a day and age, a society where there's so much information out there, right? So you can definitely, like, on your own, take it upon yourself to, read more. There are books, there are articles, there are blogs, right? There's, social media right now. There's a lot on Instagram, Facebook. You can simply just even search what is autism, and you will get a lot of information. Of course, we do need to kind of filter through that information. I think making sure that you're going to accredited source would be important as well. So there's the online access to information. There are workshops and training. So that would be one way to kind of make sure that you're getting information that is accurate and things that you can apply as well. So that could be a workshop that you see online that's provided by a professional who's trained in the field. So you might be able to learn a bit more, and they will teach you about how to support. Like, let's say you are a parent or caregiver, or even a neighbor, or somebody who knows somebody who's autistic, right? That's something that you can do to really educate yourself to know, when I see this child or when I see this person, this is a way that I might be able to be more sensitive and support them. in our interactions, right?
Gabriella,
But
I am
then,
so sorry, but I
yeah,
need to just jump in because we are out of time. But thank you so much for the conversation this morning. Hopefully we can have you back again soon to learn a bit more about how we can manage if we are affected and just practice inclusion. Have a great day. Thank you.
yes, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Gabriella Sankar talking to us about autism awareness. Stay tuned. There's more coming up on the Now Morning Show.